So we are continuing from the previous slide where we were talking about shapes, and I challenged you all to take these triangles and create an interesting design or pattern with them. And here's some examples. So this is a possible solution. I took a plant because I want to create organic, so I started with a plant, and I arranged the shapes like this. Actually, oh yes, okay, I'm sorry. I thought it said second solution. It's actually the same solution. So the next thing was I varied the sizes of the shapes. Okay, I scaled them different sizes to create variation. And it wasn't random. I made sure that I thought about spacing between them so that they stayed separate but also overlapping so they unified. And then the third step was, once I did that, I came in and I added some circles, and I created circles that were the same color as the background to create a negative space so that it would punch through them. Now imagine that I have just designed this playground, and this is a plaza, and now I'm going to put the playground equipment on top of this plaza, and the plaza is going to have these different colors of tile, and it's going to make this interesting shape. And while you would never see it from this view, you would feel it on the ground. The design would still achieve its goal on the ground as being interesting and creative and original. And you could actually take it further and put hopscotch or other playground symbols on there. This could also become a building floor plan. Obviously, I would, instead of starting off with triangles, I would start off with, and we're going to get into this, we'd start off with room bubbles, bubble diagrams, and arrange those rooms in a way that could be more abstract and creative. And it could create an interesting floor plan. I just have to make sure it's what my client wants and not just doing it to do it because I thought it was cool. And I will tell you that, sometimes you when you're doing work for clients and they want something and you want something else, and you have to give them what they want because of the client, but you're still going to do it in a way that's well done. I would used to take my projects home and do them on my own time to make them the way I wanted them. And that's what went in my portfolio instead of what the client wanted, because your portfolio is supposed to showcase your best work. Now, I mean, I had other things where I got to get to do great stuff and I could say, okay, this got built and here's the final image, but it helps alleviate that frustration when you're dealing with a client who just isn't ready to go to that next level with you. Okay, so a form is two things actually. Let's make it. Let's combine them into one. So a form is a three-dimensional shape, but it's also the visual appearance or configuration of an object. So form can have two different definitions. For the sake of what we're doing here, we're going to say shapes are two-dimensional and forms are three-dimensional. For example, a shape is a square, a form is a cube. A shape is a circle, a form is a sphere or a cylinder. Okay. Form is a positive element on your page. It's not negative space, because everything in your design is either form or space, positive or negative, figure or ground. So form is point, line, and shape. And I included Ai Weiwei's very controversial artwork here because I think it's important to explore beyond the comfortable and look at what people have to say. Even if you don't agree with them, it's really important to look at other viewpoints. And this one is very powerful. He did it for victims of the 2008 earthquake in Sichuan. And these are, obviously, as you can see, sunflower seeds. And they were made out of porcelain. So you can walk on them. And one of the reasons that this is here is obviously because it's really very interesting artwork, but also it's to have the opportunity to talk about building codes. Um, I got to spend many years of my career working with code officials. And of course, a lot of architects absolutely loathe building code officials because they're the antithesis to our creativity. But I value what they do and respect what they do in the code because this wouldn't exist if China had building codes. They don't. If there's an earthquake, things fall over and people die. Here we have very stringent building codes. And so you hear about earthquakes, but you very rarely hear about anyone dying in them. And so that is the thing to think about when you get frustrated with the building codes when you're designing, because you will. Um, I'm telling you that from personal experience. Young architect, somebody going, you got a dead end corridor there. I'm like, oh, everything worked, everything fit. You got to get rid of that. Okay. Um, know that it saves lives. I mean, codes can be very tedious and dry, but they do save lives. Okay, so figure and ground, as we talked about in Gestalt, are mutually dependent on each other. You can't change one without changing the other. So as you increase your plane, you increase your positive space and decrease your negative space. And we're going to talk more about what space is. We got a whole lecture on that, but you do. So that's what happens. Oh, I don't know where all this green. I know these are links. Actually, I'm going to leave that one in case anybody wants to go to it. So it's always important to understand the relationship between form and space because all forms carry some kind of meaning, even if you don't know what they are. There's always a meaning behind a form. For instance, the stop sign, right? If I show you a red octagon and say, what does this mean? You're going to say it means stop. That one's just universal. There are others that are less. So your choice in which forms to use is very important to consider in communicating the right message in your work. Whether you use a circle, a square, a block, a bean shape, or what have you is important. And let's talk about this in architectural forms. A building does not have to be a rectangular box. I know most of them are. They don't have to be. They're done that way for many reasons. I mean, it's easier to build a rectangle. It's cheaper to build a rectangle. Function, if it's a warehouse or, it's just easier to work with. It's just easier to work on a grid. But they're not very interesting and they're very forgettable. And if our goal is to be able to create memorable and interesting and creative designs, then we have to think outside the box, figuratively and literally. And here are some examples of that. These are forms that are not boxes. Now, obviously, let's look at this. I love this one, this panel geyser. I love that. I think it's great. It's a form of deconstructivism, that you take this cylinder and you explode it, and then you take the parts and pieces and put it back together like a tower. Pretty cool concept. And that was big when I was in industry. We did a lot of deconstructivism in our designs. You'd see a lot of planes, and but it's expensive because then someone has to, instead of putting up, say, okay, so we're going to create a tower. Instead of putting up 4 walls, we've got multiple panels, and so it gets very expensive. Now, I will tell you this as somebody who's been through this myself: you may not always win the war, but find a moment or an element within your design where you can win that point. The Sydney Opera House in Australia was inspired by segments of an orange. They were arranged abstractly to create the sails on the exterior of the building. And there's an image of it. Beautiful. Okay, your turn. I hope you guys are doing these because they do help. I mean, trying to do little activities like this starts engaging your brain and your hand into a relationship of understanding between what you're doing and committing to memory. Okay, so explain the difference between this circle and this cylinder using visual descriptives and adjectives. And it's telling me that that word is not right, but it has no suggestion, so it probably just doesn't like that it's plural. And I don't like it. There's a bullet point there. Sorry. Okay, so here's the couple solutions. The circle is two-dimensional, while the cylinder is three-dimensional. The circle is a shape, while the cylinder is a form. The cylinder has width, depth, and height, while the circle only has width and depth. And you know me, I'm going to argue that it could also have width and height, or height and depth, depending on how you orient it in the three-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. The circle has area, while the cylinder has volume. And so that's going to take us next to volume. Let's see. I'm actually going to stop this video here because I won't be able to finish this. Well, I might. Let's try. Volume is a quantity of three-dimensional space enclosed by a closed surface. So volumes are empty space defined by surfaces, lines, and points. So this is a volume if it's empty. It's a form if it's not. Okay? That's ultimately what it comes down to. In two-dimensional design, we can only offer the perception of mass, density, and volume. When we go to 3 dimensions, then we create volume. And we do it by adding pattern and texture, but, to create more interest. All of these are volumes if they are not solid, if they are hollow. And I thought this was really cool. This artist hung a series of objects from the ceiling, and the volume that is created is actually not really there. And since we live in a three-dimensional world, when we add volumetric qualities to our two-dimensional format, we add a sense of realism to design. Okay, so despite using two-dimensional forms, the artist Derek Gores creates the illusion of three-dimensional space, which is volume. This is strictly two-dimensional, but when you look at it, it appears to be objects floating within space. And so it creates this false illusion of depth, height, and width, which is indicative of volume. And this is pretty interesting. When you look at this plays with 2D and 3D. But again, a room is a volume. And so when you're inside this room, right, and you can see on the bottom here, he uses these flat surfaces to create these three-dimensional shapes that appear to be part of the volume. And you see multiple volumes here, right? These bases that are part of the building are voluminous. Okay, so how could you arrange two-dimensional objects cut out of magazines to create the illusion of volume? What could you do to create a collage that appears to be three-dimensional, but is actually two-dimensional? I'll give you an example in the next